On a silent Christmas night, he waited alone at the train station, unaware that the next person to step off the train would change his life forever. The station clock clicked toward midnight with a tired sound, like it too wanted to go home. Snow lay in thin, uncertain sheets along the platform, swept into pale drifts by the wind that slipped through the open ends of the station. A single wreath hung crooked above the ticket office window, its red bow faded, its pine needles shedding onto the sill. Christmas Eve, and the last train of the night was due any minute. He stood alone beneath the lamp at the end of the platform, collar turned up, hands deep in his coat pockets. His breath fogged the air, each exhale a small white cloud that vanished as quickly as it appeared. He had been standing there for hours, it felt like, though his watch insisted it had only been 40 minutes. Time had a way of stretching when there was nothing to distract it but hope. He wasn't sure why he had come so early. Habit, perhaps, or fear that if he arrived at the last possible moment, he might miss something important. He had done that once before, arrived late to a goodbye, and he still carried the weight of it in his chest. The station was almost empty. A janitor pushed a broom near the far wall, humming a tune that sounded like an old carol. Somewhere inside the building, a radio crackled with a distant announcer, wishing listeners a Merry Christmas before signing off. The rest of the town had gone dark and warm, tucked into kitchens and living rooms, wrapped in laughter and the smell of food. He imagined tables crowded with plates, children shaking wrapped boxes, couples leaning close. He imagined all of it because he had none of it tonight. He had once. Not the children, but the warmth. A small house near the river, a narrow porch, a pine tree that leaned a little too much to the left, lights in the windows, someone waiting for him inside. That life felt like something he had dreamed rather than lived, and sometimes he wondered if he had exaggerated it in his memory just to survive the present. The train whistle cut through the cold, long and low, echoing off the hills. His heart lifted despite himself. He stepped closer to the edge of the platform, boots crunching on ice. The tracks began to hum, a faint vibration that traveled up through the soles of his feet. Headlights appeared in the distance, twin stars growing brighter as they approached. He told himself not to expect anything. He told himself he was just there because the station was quieter than his apartment, because it was better to wait among strangers than sit alone with his thoughts. He told himself a lot of things, but his hands still trembled slightly as the train slowed. Metal screamed against metal as the train pulled in, steam and snow swirling together in a brief, ghostly storm. Doors opened along the length of the cars. A few passengers stepped down. 2 college kids laughing too loudly, an elderly man with a suitcase held together by tape, a woman wrapped in a thick scarf who walked quickly toward the exit without looking back. He watched each face with an intensity that surprised him. He didn't know what he was looking for exactly. Not a specific person, just something. A sign that this night wasn't meant to end the way all the others had this year. When most of the passengers had cleared, he felt the familiar sinking sensation in his stomach. The train hissed, readying itself to depart. The conductor called out a warning. He took a step back, already preparing himself for the walk home through quiet streets, for reheated soup and an early night. Then he saw her. She stepped off the last car slowly, as if reluctant to leave the warmth behind. She was bundled in a long coat the color of wet sand, a knit hat pulled low over her ears. A single suitcase followed her, its wheels catching slightly on the uneven platform. She paused at the bottom of the steps and looked around, uncertainty written plainly across her face. It wasn't that she was extraordinary in any obvious way. She wasn't glowing or dressed in red like some Christmas postcard. It was the way she stood there, alone in the cold, scanning the nearly empty station, that caught him. It mirrored something in him so closely it made his chest ache. The conductor called again. The doors slid shut. With a final shudder, the train began to move, pulling away into the dark, taking its warmth and noise with it. Snow settled back onto the platform, the silence rushing in to fill the space it left. She watched the train disappear, then let out a breath that he could see even from where he stood. She shifted her suitcase, adjusted the strap of her bag on her shoulder, and turned as if unsure which way to go. He hesitated. He wasn't the kind of man who approached strangers. He had learned to keep to himself to avoid intruding on other people's lives. But something about this moment, about Christmas night and the empty station and the shared loneliness in the air, loosened something in him. "Excuse me," he said, his voice sounding louder than he intended in the quiet. She looked up, startled at first, then curious. Her eyes were a clear, steady blue, the kind that seemed to notice things. "Yes? Do you need directions?" he asked. "Or help with anything?" She considered him for a moment, as if weighing a decision. Then she smiled, a small, grateful curve of her mouth that warmed him more than his coat ever could. "Actually, yes. I was hoping there'd be a taxi, but I don't see one." "They don't run this late," he said. "Not on Christmas Eve." She laughed softly, the sound edged with tiredness. "I was afraid you'd say that. Where are you headed?" She told him the name of a small boarding house on the other side of town. He nodded. "That's about a 20-minute walk. Less if you don't mind the cold." She glanced down at her suitcase, then back up at the dark street beyond the station. "I don't really have a choice, do I?" He surprised himself by saying, "I'm headed that way. I can walk with you if you'd like." Her relief was immediate and unguarded. "I'd appreciate that. Thank you." They set off together, their footsteps falling into an easy rhythm on the snow-dusted sidewalk. The town looked different at night, stripped down to essentials. Storefronts were dark, their windows decorated with lights that glowed faintly even after closing. A church bell chimed in the distance, marking the hour. "I'm Eli," he said after a few minutes. "Claire," she replied. "Nice to meet you, Eli." They walked in companionable silence for a while, the kind that didn't feel awkward. He was aware of her presence beside him, the sound of her breathing, the occasional clink of her suitcase wheels. It had been a long time since he'd shared space with someone like this, without obligation or history. "What brings you here on Christmas?" he asked eventually. She hesitated, then shrugged. "A job interview, believe it or not. Tomorrow morning." "On Christmas Day?" "Well, technically the day after, but I wanted to arrive early, get settled." She smiled ruefully, though I didn't expect settled to include wandering around in the snow at midnight. He smiled back. "Life has a way of ignoring our expectations." She glanced at him. "It sounds like you know that firsthand." He considered brushing it off, but the night felt honest. "I do. My wife passed away last spring." "I'm so sorry," she said immediately, her voice gentle. "Thank you." He paused, then added, "Christmas was her favorite. This is the first one without her." They walked on, the words hanging between them. He wasn't sure why he'd said it. He rarely spoke of her to strangers. But Claire didn't respond with platitudes or hurried sympathy. She simply nodded, acknowledging the weight of it. "I lost my father last year," she said quietly. "Different kind of loss, but the holidays make it louder, don't they?" He nodded. "They do." When they reached the boarding house, a narrow brick building with a single light burning in the window, Claire stopped and turned to him. "Thank you for walking with me," she said. "I'm really glad you were there tonight." "So am I," he said, surprised to find he meant it more than he could explain. She hesitated, then reached into her bag and pulled out a small card. "This might be forward, but I don't know anyone in town yet. If you'd like to have coffee sometime, I'd enjoy that." His heart gave a startled leap. He took the card, her handwriting neat and confident. "I'd like that," he said. They stood there for a moment longer, neither quite ready to say goodbye. Then she smiled again, that same warm smile, and turned toward the door. "Merry Christmas, Eli," she said. "Merry Christmas, Claire." He watched until she disappeared inside, then tucked the card carefully into his pocket. The walk home felt shorter, the cold less biting. His apartment was still quiet when he arrived, still empty, but it didn't feel as heavy. He made himself a cup of tea and stood by the window, looking out at the street. Snow had begun to fall again, soft and steady. Somewhere, people were laughing. Somewhere, someone was waiting for a train. He knew better than to turn a single meeting into a promise. Life had taught him that. But as he stood there, holding the warmth of the mug between his hands, he allowed himself a small, cautious hope. Not for a replacement of what he'd lost, but for something new, something unexpected. On Christmas night, when he had gone to the station expecting nothing, a stranger had stepped off the train. And in that simple, ordinary moment, the world had shifted just enough to remind him that even after loss, even after long loneliness, there were still arrivals worth waiting for.